Okay, it looks looking good. Okay, hi everybody. I thought what I would do for the next couple of Facebook Live videos is talk to you about tracking your board straight. Some people are really good at it, and you'll see them paddling indefinitely on one side without having to change sides to steer. And other people, they'll take some strokes on one side and then they'll have to take some strokes on another side just to keep their board straight, and they'll be tracking along, in a zigzag pattern. You'll see people that are paddling, they can paddle pretty straight in normal calm conditions, but when they get in a side wind, they have to paddle all the time on one side, and they can't find any strokes on the upwind side, right? The upwind side. Because they just lose their steering, and so they have to paddle on the downwind side just to keep their nose heading into the wind. And I'm a firm believer that you should change sides when you want to change sides, not when you have to keep your board straight. I've found that gives you a lot of advantages when you're racing, and it just makes your everyday paddling, your normal paddling, if you're not really into racing and more recreational, it makes it a lot more enjoyable. So it's worth spending some time talking about. And every time I do a clinic or run a training camp, this is one of the lessons that we do. And I always do it on the water. And what I find is that for some people, they have a bit of a hard time with some of the things I'm explaining when they're actually on the water, because balance is an issue. That's one reason. And another reason is simply because they don't really understand the distribution of their body weight. They stand on the board and they are trying to balance their board, but they don't really understand how the weight is distributed between their feet, or whether it's forward on their feet or back on their feet, or side to side, that type of thing. And so when you're asking somebody to do something like paddle close to the rail or lean their board, and both of those things are important techniques that I will share with you in coming videos about tracking your board straight. If you don't have this appreciation for how to distribute your weight, or how your weight is distributed, how to feel the distribution of weight in your feet, then I think it's a problem. And so here we are, a lot of us are shut off the water now because of the pandemic. I'm one of you now, and not thrilled about it, but there are some things that we can talk about that are going to help you better understand what it is you're doing when you get back in the water, and hopefully that will make a difference to your paddling when we're able to paddle again. So what I'd like to do in today's video is just talk to you about weight distribution and get you to feel, maybe for the first time, how your weight is distributed. And we'll even look at the weight distribution and some of the things that I've been talking about in the videos that I've shown you so far, the land drills that I've shown you. And I want you to try to play with this on your own and get an appreciation for it. It'll probably help you do the land drills better. But when we get to steering, leaning your board, paddling close to the rail, paddling under the rail, having a better idea how your weight's distributed, I think, is really going to help you. And so, I'm just checking a message here. So let's get started. I'm just going to shift the camera a little bit to get some more space. I'm going to stand up and make sure that you're able to see my feet, because obviously if we're talking about weight distribution through your feet, we need to see my feet. Okay, so I'm just going to get up. I'm going to put this out of the way. I'm going to shift the camera a bit so I've got a little bit more room. Okay, and so right now you can't see my feet. I'm just going to tilt the camera a bit. I want to get rid of that. Yeah. Okay. Everyone's still with me? Is it still going? Still going. Okay. So, you should be able to see my feet now, right? I'm just going to actually maybe move this back just a little bit. Just bear with me. Just got to go over a table here. Okay, that's better. Okay, so you can see my feet. So In the first land drill I showed you, we were talking about getting your weight forward and getting your weight in front of your center of mass, in front of your body, in front of your toes. We talked about being in our stance, putting our ski boots on so we got our knees ahead of our toes. So we'll just turn. You can see my feet there. Knees are ahead of my toes, right? And I don't know how well you can see this, but if you get up on your feet and try this with me, you can very clearly feel when your feet or when your weight is on your toes, when it's evenly distributed across your entire foot, or when it's back on your heels, right? So there my weight's on my heels. I don't think you ever want to have your weight on your heels when you're paddling. Here's my weight spread out evenly over my entire foot, front to back. And then now my weight is more on my toes, right? Now, if you look at my heels, they're still on the ground. My heels, let's go a little further away here. My heels are not, it's not like they're up off the ground. They're still on the ground, but the weight is very clearly on my toes, okay? Now this is a situation or a position whereas if I were to just lean forward a little bit, like I'm going to rotate and reach, I start to topple. That's where I lose my balance. And if I've got a paddle in my hand, as soon as I reach forward like that and start to lean forward and I lose my balance, my weight goes onto the paddle blade. And the paddle blade supports me, keeps me from falling in the water or falling onto the deck of my board. And that's exactly what we've been talking about getting weight on your blade. It helps you use your body weight better. It helps ensure that your blade gets buried more quickly, right? And so that the blade is getting buried with a positive angle really quickly rather than traveling back and losing blade angle until it reaches a point close to your body where it's almost vertical and it's finally buried. Okay, and that happens just simply because when you're on your board, you're in a position where your weight is more towards your toes than it is spread out over your entire foot or back on your heels. All right, and you can do this just standing, in your kitchen, or I'd suggest doing it if you have a full-length mirror, trying these things I'm about to show you in front of the full-length mirror. And the important thing isn't so much to look and to see what it looks like when your weight is more on your toes or spread out over your entire foot or on your heels. It's to feel what the weight is like when it's on your toes more as opposed to your heels more, or as opposed to spread out evenly over your entire foot. Because feeling is what you're going to go by when you get on your board, okay? So, again, right, if hips are forward, our legs are bent a bit, our ski boots are on, so our knees are in front of our toes, that really helps us get in a position where you can just feel that your weight is more on your toes than it is in your heels. Your heels are still on the board, but the weight's in front of your body enough to make you feel like, wow, my weight's on my toes. And so when you start to reach and go forward, really what you're doing is you're reaching from your feet, not from your waist, or not so much from your shoulder. Your shoulders are certainly rotating, and you're certainly bending at the waist, but that's not where the reach is coming from. The reach is coming from your feet. And I think people need to start thinking about reaching from their feet, okay? The more we can start to think about the involvement of our feet, the more we're going to be in control of our board, and also the more we're going to be able to bring our hips and our legs into our stroke, okay? So that's the first thing that I think is important. And I can't think of a time when you really want to have your weight in your heels. I suppose the only time would be, if you need to trim your board, if your nose is purling and you need to trim your board. But anytime I've had that happen, just leaning slightly back on my heels isn't really enough to change that situation. It usually involves a step back, and then I can actually weight my back leg. It doesn't have to be a giant step. Sometimes it's just a little step and just a weight, a lean back a little bit on that back foot. And that's usually enough to change the attitude of your board and keep your nose from purling. But just with both feet in position and just leaning back on your heels, I can't really think of a reason that you want to do that is going to promote good paddling. However, when your weight is more on your toes, right, your heels are still on the board or on the floor, but more on your toes, and you feel like you're going to reach forward from your feet or topple forward from your feet, that creates a whole host of good things that are happening. Getting weight on your blade, getting the blade buried quickly, getting a more powerful stroke, okay? So that's the front to back distribution of body weight on your feet. But now that we've talked about that, we need to think about the side to side version. And this is where we need to think about, one foot taking more of your body weight than the other foot, okay? A couple of years ago, I think it was June, reached out to me, and he was having a real hard time because we were talking about getting over top of your blade, getting out like your weight on your blade. I'll just grab my paddle and show you. We're talking about being in this position, right? With the top hand over top of the bottom hand and being what we call squared up, so you're not like this, because this is doing you no good. You're not getting any weight on your blade. This, when you're squared up as you're catching, you're getting all kinds of weight on your blade. And he was having a hard time because whenever he tried to do that, his board would tilt to the paddling side, right? And so what was happening is he was actually reaching from his paddling side foot, or he was leaning to the side from his paddling side foot. More weight was going on his paddling side foot than was going on his, I like to call it his non-paddling side, or his inside the board foot. And so as a consequence, his board tilted to the paddling side. And so, what I had to do is show him, I described to him the difference, what I wanted him to try to think about, but that wasn't working. So I actually took a picture. I took a picture of this. So I took a picture of, you can see my feet there, okay? So I took a picture of this, where I was leaning from my feet, from my paddling side foot, and then I took a picture, which was what you don't want to do, because that would lower my paddling rail into the water. And then I took a picture of this, where I'm like that. And in this position, my weight is evenly distributed between my feet. In this position, my weight is more on my paddling side foot than it is on my inside foot, okay? And so the first is what you want to try to do, the second is what you don't want to do. And it's a bit confusing because in a front of the board to the back of the board sense, when you're looking at me in this way from the side, I just finished telling you I want you to think about reaching from your feet, right? I want you leaning forward on your toes. I want you reaching from your feet. I don't want your heels off the board, but I want more weight on the front of your feet on your toes than spread out evenly on your feet or with your weight in your heels. Okay, I want you reaching from your feet. But when we look at somebody from the front of the board or the back of the board, so in a side-to-side sense, you don't want to reach from your feet, because as soon as you do that, you're going to make one rail go down and the other rail come up, and that's not the way a board runs fast, and that's not the way a board runs straight. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to keep our weight spread evenly between our left foot and our right foot at all times, pretty much, right? I'm going to show you an exception to that for board tracking in a second, but for the most part, we want to have our weight evenly distributed between our feet. So the trick here then is to, first of all, get in your stance with the appropriate amount of space between your feet. So, if you have a parallel stance and your feet are shoulder width apart, get in that position. If you have a slightly staggered stance like I do, I have my inside foot is slightly ahead of my paddling side foot. I've got my paddling side foot points out a little bit, like it's duck-footed out to the side just a little bit. And the toe of my right foot, if I'm paddling the right side, is about the middle of my left foot or my inside foot. Okay, now your stance is preference. There's no right or wrong in how you stand on the board. Some people stand with a parallel stance, some people stand with a staggered stance. I guess I would correct that. There is a wrong. I don't see paddling with your paddling side foot being in front of your inside foot as being effective. I find that you get really jammed up in here when you try to reach forward. It's much easier to reach forward if with a parallel stance. You don't get as jammed up. And the reason I like to have that slight stagger is it's even easier to reach forward, because my hip bone, my iliac crest here, my hip bone, doesn't get in the way when I try to lower my paddling side to the water. So that's why I choose a slight stagger, but a parallel stance works fine. I just think that as soon as you put your paddling side foot as the leading foot, it's like your hips get in the way of your leaning out over the water. But get in your stance and just think about your weight being distributed evenly between your right foot and your left foot. In fact, what you can do is you can put more weight on your right foot. You can put more weight on your left foot. You can feel what it feels like when one foot is weighted more than the other. Okay, feel what it's like when your right foot is weighted more than the left. And then come back to center where you can feel that the weight is evenly distributed. And then, if you're in front of that full length mirror, get your paddle in your hand and get in your paddling position and try to find a way to get squared up as you would at the catch without weight going more on your paddling side foot than your inside foot. Okay? Just, again, think about the distribution of weight between each foot. Come back. Lean more on your right foot. Lean more on your left foot. If you're paddling on the right like I am, lean on your right foot. Feel what it feels like when more weight is on your right foot. Bring it off your right foot so that it's evenly distributed between both feet. Try to keep it evenly distributed between both feet as you reach forward and square up. Okay? And this is the position you need to be in. And the trick actually is to think about crunching your obliques a little bit on your paddling side, right? And actually maybe you can even stick your hips out to the opposite side a little bit, and that helps you actually lower your entire paddling side to the water, expose it to the water, so it's going to help you get a deeper, more engaged stroke when you catch. And remember, if your shoulder is further from the water, then your paddling side hand is further from the water, and your blade tip is further from the water. If your shoulder is lower to the water, then your paddling side hand is lower to the water, and your blade tip is lower to the water, and it's lower or deeper in the water once you're in the water, okay? So if we want to get the blade buried quickly, it's important to be a little bit lower to the water with our paddling side. And of course we can bend our legs more to help us get lower, but part of it is what we're doing with our upper body and how we're getting in that squared up position, okay? And a big part of that is being able to maintain a level board and even weight distribution between both feet as we do it, okay? So right now we haven't even talked about board tracking. We've only talked about things that you were exposed to in the land drills that I did over the last week and a half. And in particular, like land drill number 1, the first drill, which was getting weight on the blade and catching. But it's important to backtrack here and discuss that again, because right now we're discussing it as it pertains to weight distribution. And what we're going to do when we start looking at tracking your board straight is we're going to consider changing our weight distribution from even between both feet to weighting one foot more than another, because we'll actually want to lean our board to track our board straight, okay? So let me just back off on weight distribution for a second and tell you where we're going to go over the next few videos that I'm going to do with regards to board tracking. So there's 3 tools that you can use to track your board straight or correct a steering, correct your board when it's running in one direction or the other. And I guess just even before we talk about that, we should talk about why your board wanders to one side than the other, right? When you're paddling a distance from the center of the board. If you imagine that the center of the board was directly in the middle of where my feet are, the only way we could take a stroke that didn't have a turning effect on the board is if we paddled right up the middle of the board, which would be hard to do because we'd have to paddle through our bodies to do it, right? Can't do that. Maybe if you're on a stand-a-moran, you could paddle in front of your body, and then you'd have to pull it out and go again. I don't think that would be particularly a powerful position to be in, but it wouldn't turn your board. However, the rest of us are on boards that have width to them. And if you're on a really wide board, you've got to get way outside that point between the middle of your feet to get your board, to get your blade squared up, and to get your paddle blade close to the rail of the board. Okay, like right along the rail of the board. In my next video, when we talk about this technique, paddling close to the rail, I'll put a piece of tape down on the floor and we'll use that as a rail of the board. But for now, I'm just trying to convince you that, you know, when you are on a wide board, you're a fair distance from the center line of the board. Even when you're on a nice skinny 21-inch wide board or 20-inch board, you're really close. You're still much closer to the center of the board, but you're still a good distance away from it. You figure if you're on a 21-inch wide board, you're 11 or 10 and a half inches or more away from the center line of the board. So even if you're making every effort to paddle close to the rail of the board, there's still going to be a turning effect, and your board is still going to run to the opposite side, right? Now you can compound that by having your top hand inside the board, which means your blade is further away from the center line of the board. That's going to increase the turning effect. But that's why when we take strokes, the board runs to the opposite sides, because we're not paddling down the center line of the board. We're creating forces that do three things. One, move us forward. Two, lift our board a little bit, and that makes it easier for our board to move forward if we lift it a lot. And three, turn our board away from the paddling side, right? And so what we're trying to do in all the board tracking things that I'm going to show you is we're trying to minimize that turning effect or counter that turning effect, okay? And those are the skills that I'm going to show you over the next 3 videos. But I'm just going to tell you where we're going on this so you can think ahead. The first skill that we are going to talk about is paddling close to the rail of the board, okay? And I just alluded to that. There's a difference between paddling like this with your blade, your top hand inside the board. We know that's not a powerful position because we've already talked about that when we got into the first land drill at the catch. But the other problem with it is look where your blade is relative to the rail. It's way out to the side, right? Instead of tucked up against the rail. It's going to increase the turning effect. So we'll talk about how to get closer to the rail of the board. The second skill is leaning the board, tilting the board. And on displacement boards, we want to tilt it opposite to the way we would tilt or weight the rails of a skateboard, a surfboard, or a snowboard. Right? On those 3 types of boards, if you want to turn, say to the right, you weight the right rail and it carves and turns to the side that you weight. On a displacement board in SUP, we want to weight actually the opposite rail. And unless we're standing at the back of the board and surfing, and then it behaves like a surfboard. But for straight ahead paddling, it's weight the opposite rail. It behaves like a canoe or a kayak or some type of paddling boat, like not a board. So we want to weight the opposite rail. But if we're going to weight the opposite rail, we have to have an appreciation for weight distribution between our feet, right? Which is why I wanted to talk about that first. Then the third skill that we're going to look at is called drawing the nose, and that's where we're going to use the blade face. So the face of the blade here, and its orientation when it goes in the water, we're going to use that to help move the nose of our board. Okay? And then we're going to talk about how all these skills need to be used together to be really effective. I'll just give you, for instance, when you tilt your board, and so you tilt away from the paddling side if you want to turn to the paddling side, what it does is the rail of your board, the paddling side, comes up like that, and it actually exposes the underside of the board a little bit, and it makes it possible for you not only to paddle close to the rail, but actually underneath the rail a little bit. You can actually get out and get underneath the rail a little bit as you pull, and look how much closer the blade actually gets when it goes under the board like that. It gets very close to the center line of the board and really minimizes the turning effect. You can actually use it to pull yourself in the direction of the paddle. Okay, so those are the drills that we're going to look at in the coming few videos, and I just wanted to prepare you for that because I'm going to ask everyone we're going to talk about weighting one foot more or the other, okay? And we already know that we're going to talk about getting your blade close to the rail, which means if you're going to do it properly, weight needs to be distributed evenly between your feet, right? So work if you can, and it doesn't take long. It's like 5 minutes to just play around and discover what it feels like to have weight evenly distributed between your feet, weight more on one foot, weight more on the other foot, weight evenly distributed, weight distributed more on your toes, weight distributed evenly across your foot front to back, weight distributed more on your heels, right? There, I've done it. Just play with that a little bit and get a real appreciation for how your body weight is being placed or distributed through your feet. Because when I ask you to get into a close to the rail position, I'm going to want your weight distributed evenly between both feet. I don't want you reaching with all of your weight on your paddling side foot, okay? You're not leaning out over the water from your paddling side foot. Leaning out over the water's got to come from up above, from your waist, okay? It's different than reaching forward to catch the water. That doesn't come from just your waist up. It doesn't come from there. That comes from your feet, right? That's where you reach from your feet. So it depends on what orientation or what plane we're looking at. Are we looking at like that side view, that side orientation, front of the board, back of the board? In that case, we want you reaching from your feet. Or are we looking at it head on, right? Like, are we looking at the front of the board or the back of the board and looking at the cross section of the board? And if that's the case, we want weight, for the most part, evenly distributed between right foot and left foot, unless you're trying to do something turning the board, okay? So that's it for today. It's a short video. There's not a lot for you to practice. I just want you to have an awareness of how you can distribute your body weight. Now, maybe I'll leave you with this. If I asked you to weight the opposite rail, okay, push the opposite rail of your board down. So I'm paddling on the right, my paddle is going to go into the right. I want you to push the left rail down a bit while you're paddling and hold it down while you're paddling. How might you do that? How are you going to be able to go through the paddling motion and yet feel like there's more weight consistently through the stroke on your opposite foot? Opposite side, inside foot. Okay, how are you going to do that? I want you to experiment with that. If there's such a thing as homework on these videos during this lockout, that's your homework for today. Until next time, is to think about how you would weight the opposite rail, hold it weighted, and still be able to paddle effectively, right, on your paddling side. That's your homework, and if you can figure out how to do that, then you've got a real good sense of weight distribution between your feet and how to, move your lower body and control weight distribution while your upper body is doing something entirely different. Okay? And that's going to be the key to success in all of this. All right? So stay healthy, stay well. Go Raptors. If they were playing, it would be an exciting time, but sadly they're not. And I will see you... I'll get down here. I will see you on the next time, whenever that is. I'm not quite sure yet, but it will be again this week. We're just building our schedule. And because there's obviously Seychelles and Victoria, and we've got guest presenters as well. So I will see you again shortly, and we'll pick up where we left off here. All right, stay well, everybody, and I will see you soon.